Hi, everyone. Today we're excited to welcome Dr. Tolga Birdal to the show. Dr. Birdal is a lecturer at Imperial College, London, where his groundbreaking work intersects computer vision, machine learning, and 3D geometry. From advancing 3D object recognition to pushing the boundaries of computational geometry, Dr. Birdal is at the forefront of research that is shaping the future of AI and its applications. His academic journey and professional achievements include collaborations with some of the most innovative institutions, having made him a leading figure in his field. We're thrilled to dive into his research, the challenges he's overcome, and what the future holds for computer vision and AI. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Birdal.
Yeah, thanks, Alex.
Yeah.
That was a very good introduction.
Excellent. Good. Well, let's start off with tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so right now I'm an assistant professor, and as they call in London, lecturer in computing department in Imperial College London. I like this name. Computing sounds much better of a department name than computer science. The computer is a device, and computing is more the concept, as the action, right? And as you said, I do a lot of research in 3D vision, geometry, topology, machine learning, right? And I have a group here. I like to call it Circle. And right now there are 7 people. Well, I mean, 2 postdocs and 4 or 5 PhD students. So one is to join. And I recently got a fellowship called the UKRI Future Leaders Fellowship. That's a rather prestigious fellowship for my level of academics in the
Congratulations.
UK.
Amazing.
Thank you. It's a prestigious. Thank you. So definitely that means definitely my group is going to grow a little more, in the upcoming let's say days or months or years. Hopefully, so I'm very happy with being in Imperial, and I have been here for 2 years. Before that, I was in California, spending some time in Stanford, a geometric computing group, for 2 years, and before that, I was in Germany, where I was doing my PhD work.
I'll tell you a little story about Imperial. So a long time ago, I was in Queen Mary, which is it's part of University of London, right? So due to various reasons which I will not go into, there is the student union in Imperial College, which is not that far. So you are based in South Kensington, isn't it? So
it's that.
So to go there and sometimes, let's just say, have fun. It's quite a cool place to go. I was only 19 or whatever it is, but yes, it's a brilliant place. If you're ever going, have a look. It's a brilliant place to.
Yeah, I know. It's a beautiful place, and there are so many museums around, and everything. Actually, I really like to walk during my meetings, and one of my concerns, moving from California to here, is that I wouldn't be able to walk because it's rainy and stuff. But actually, there are museums around, so maybe we cannot walk out. We can definitely go to the museums and have a beautiful walk. And this is even more inspiring than walking around Stanford, I would say.
I mean, Science Museum is amazing. Natural History Museum, all that. It's a brilliant place. Yeah, enough about museums.
Yeah.
Yes, please, Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask, kind of like, it'd be great to hear, how you got into, computer vision, 3D geometry. Where did it all start for you?
Right. So first of all, I am an electronics engineer by training. I'm neither a mathematician nor a computer scientist. And now actually we see that machine learning people can get a Nobel in physics, but I'm also not a physics person. So I'm none of them, right? And so I started actually, so of course, like many students, who are interested in this field, I was good in maths when I was in high school. But when you are good in maths and so I'm from Turkey, and when you are in Turkey and when you are good in maths, people don't tell you to go and do mathematics freely. They tell you to go and become an engineer. So apparently an analytical mind, so you should become an engineer. Mathematics and engineering have nothing to do with each other, actually. I mean, almost nothing to do, I would say. And interestingly, I studied engineering, and electronics looked cool in terms of engineering. So I picked that. I quickly realized that I am very bad in electronics. I have no clue, no idea about how electricity works, how physics works, and so on. It was all counterintuitive to me. But I took an undergraduate course in the first year of my study. So I already knew a little bit about computer programming when I joined the university. And I took that course, which was about reading the license plates of cars as they go through some kind of a parking lot or some kind of an entrance to a parking lot. I said, well, it's taking an image and it's trying to read characters in the image. But it is to my ignorant mind, the characters are already present in the image. Right? So why would you ever try to, recognize these characters? Aren't they just there? But then on the flip side, if they are not there, how do you read them in a computer, right? So I was fascinated by this. So I took that course. This was the first time I ever heard about neural networks. And then, my love started to grow on the inside. So I quickly realized that this is not electronics. Electronics is something else. So I transitioned into some other discipline called telecommunications, which is in between. So in my university, telecommunications people were dealing with signals, and they thought image itself would be a signal, like a two-dimensional signal, right? One wave here, like on one axis, and the other wave on the other axis. So they saw image as this 2D signal, which makes sense, kind of, but it's also like a very distant way of looking at the image also, right?
Yeah.
You are trying to always decompose this thing. So, in telecommunications, I studied with these antenna people and, a lot of frequency domain analysis and stuff. And then I realized, well, I mean, this is all good, but I also need to do more than just analysis for this thing to work. And then I slowly transitioned more into computational science. So I did my master's in computational science, which was, and computational science people love the simulations and fluid dynamics type of stuff, right? Let's just write a differential equation. They didn't like vision. They didn't like machine learning at that time. So they thought, these are like, well, you are going to process data, whatever. There is no true differential equation. This is pseudoscience. Right, and so they weren't happy me doing that type of stuff. I was at technical university.
I was one of those people, by the way. I did the other side of CFD.
Exactly, yeah. So you know what I mean. And so after that, of course, I started doing this more and more. I also founded two companies in between. I can talk about them later.
Yeah.
And then, I started my PhD actually in computer science. So then I said, okay, this is a, computer science thing, so I should maybe do this. And then I tried to first do some practical stuff. I was really like a, engineer type of a guy. And 2 years into my PhD, I also got interested into the theory aspects. And now, once you start to get into theory and get deeper and deeper, you develop this love for mathematics. You learn more. You learn more and more. And at some point, I still am. I think I started to sit in between this theory and application, and I think it's a good area to sit in because you can try to both understand the underlying principles and apply them to do something different. And so this is how I developed my research direction, I think. Yeah. And that was like,
cool.
Yeah, it is. And do you feel right now, looking back from what, I mean, this was few years ago. Now you've obviously moved on to bigger and better things, obviously. Now what's going on in the world right now with, I mean, I know there's quite a huge hype with regards to LLMs and all this sort of stuff. But if you were to completely talk about, unsupervised learning as a general thing, and then, neural networks and how do you feel that you made that decision? It was a correct decision to make at that time, because it was effectively something, it was a risk effectively, isn't it? I mean, we didn't really know. I mean, I guess you didn't really know how it will turn out. Now, looking back, I'm guessing you are quite pleased that what you did.
yeah, I mean, this is a good question. So I think it wasn't a risk, first of all, simply because I didn't do it because, hey, should I invest myself in this or in that? But rather, I started to love it. Like I really developed certain kind of love towards that. So doing that wasn't an alternative at all. Not
It
doing
was your
that wasn't
calling.
an
It was
alternative.
your calling. It
Yeah.
was your
It
passion.
was the
It was
calling.
like, you know what?
Yes.
That's it. I really want to know more about it, right? Effectively.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that wasn't a risk on my end. Of course, it could have turned out to be, not useful at all, but I was very comfortable doing useless things. Sometimes I do
Yeah.
useless things, and that's okay. That's okay. It turned out to be very impactful. I'm super pleased about it, of course.
Yeah.
Right. And I find even more meaning in it now. It didn't just turn out to be practical, but it also started to tell us more about the nature of the things that, of everything around us. Basically, for example, language. It taught us a lot about what language is, right? Simply. And it tells us a lot about what visual perception is and how brain
Yeah.
understands things. Like
Yeah.
it is contributing to fundamental science. Just by,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
just by trying to replicate something, we actually learn from it,
Yeah.
right?
I
And
want
that
to
is,
I want to
Mhm.
make a little point just to say about the useless part, right? That you just said you want to do useless things, right? There is a thing called the Ig Nobel Prize. I'm sure you know, right, what that is. A
Yeah.
lot of people, I can't remember, I think it's like 40 to 50% of people who win the Ig Nobel Prize go on to win Nobel Prizes, right? So it's not it's about
Mhm.
curiosity. It's about like being passionate about what you're trying to do. And there's why does that happen? Because one of the people, I can't remember which, I think it's the person who discovered graphene. He wrote a paper 10 years before to analyzing the motion of when a girl or a woman runs on a jog or whatever, her hair bounces up and down. Sorry, she her movement is up and down, but her hair is moving side to side. Why is that? Right? It was a big question for him. So he wrote all the calculations and so on. So it's, I think it won the Ig Nobel Prize for it. What the hell is this thing? But he went on to win the Nobel Prize as well. So absolutely, I would say that is important. It's a really
It's
important thing to have as a
truly.
character,
Like
as a predisposition.
if you also look at as you say, I mean, all these great discoveries have been made this way, right? Like
Yeah,
topology, for example, was founded on this seven
exactly.
bridges problem, right? You would never expect such a thing. And then similarly, knot theory, something that actually came from a toy example of playing with knots and stuff. It became a huge field that impacts drug discovery, chemistry, and so on.
Absolutely.
I
So
think it
yeah,
has to do, right, with you have your interests, you have your skill sets, and therefore you view the day to day with a completely different lens. And the best discoveries are made by looking at what is hidden in plain sight and finding meaning behind that. And I think that's kind of,
It is.
I
where
agree.
where will real interesting breakthroughs come from.
I agree. I agree. And I think
Yeah.
this is probably the biggest advice that one can actually give, right? To kind of don't let go what you love, because
Okay.
this is the area that you will be the most innovative in,
Yeah,
Yeah.
naturally.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've worked on a lot of projects. You've discussed kind of like, the how the work that you're doing is, linked to many different fields. What sort of, there's a really exciting road ahead in terms of, the applications when it comes to robotics, AR, VR, all that stuff. Really, really exciting things. But what kind of challenges do you see kind of moving towards that field, right? You have the basic, you have the knowledge, you kind of probably have a very nice plan of where you want to go. What challenges do you see ahead of yourself in these fields?
So our field became more and more data driven, and there is no escape from it currently, right? And that means you need to do a lot of work with data. And first of all, you need to collect it, and you need to collect it in areas that you never thought. Of course, there are, this family of methods that are known to be foundation models these days, and their kind of premise is, hey, let's do this data training once, and so that everyone can use the same model for different tasks quite often. This is good, but we are still struggling to develop these models in many different areas. For example, in 3D vision for, molecular domains, right? So these are inexistent. Maybe for images, you could argue that some foundation models exist. But what we want to do is, of course, we want to leverage this data, right? And again, we need to collect and we need to be able to model this data. Now, some problems are challenging, and in some problems, the data representations are not always obvious. An image representation might be obvious, right? But we do not know how to represent some kind of data still. And even in 3D, by the way, just you go 3D, there's no consensus of how you would be able to model 3D structures. Some people use point clouds, some people use meshes, voxel grids, all these kind of mambo jumbo words around, and there is no consensus essentially. And if you go to even more complex domains of structural biology or physics, there will be even more confusions on how to do things. So data and representation are two fundamental problems, I think, that we have to solve. And of course, depending on how the data looks like and how the representation looks like, the choice of the models are going to change. And so kind of we play in this triangle, and I think we have to find a good spot. So these are challenging things. And sometimes collecting data is not that easy. Like, for example, if you are collecting medical data, you are bound to the consent of the patient. And like I want to champion at this point a little bit the ethical approaches to AI. And we should really, as engineers, like this is not a job for ethics people, right? As engineers from the ground level, we have to think about, the ethical approaches. So I value this privacy of the patients and so on, but this makes the data collection challenging. This is in, of course, medical domains, but there are other domains where data collection becomes as challenging, like in physics experiments, right? They need to kind of build these insane constructions in order to collect a little bit of data. So, like you want to understand the shape of the universe, there is just one map, like just one data point, essentially, that you need to search through. Things like that. I think this is definitely a little bit of a problem. And whenever we interact, especially with social sciences, so their experiments are usually, for example, limited to we gather data of 30 people, and their analysis is based on but I mean 30 people. If you go to an engineer, they are going to say, I mean, this is not even data. This is just a couple of sample points, right? So these are essentially important issues. I think a lot of things are hidden in the data, and that becomes a challenge. But also, of course, we have other things. So, for example, we don't know how to do machine learning on complex domains. That is still an ongoing research that I'm also actively working on as well. But I would see, these let's say this triangle as a challenge in itself.
I want to ask a little bit more about that point about the data collection and the data. So now, of course, when you collect the data, there could be inherent biases in that data, right? Where you can kind of say, so for example, I mean, sometimes the data that is available is just what it is. So imagine the transactional data, for instance, or whatever. It could be that there is inherent bias just because maybe towards a particular ethnic group or maybe particular specific geographic, whatever, right? Now, of course, that's the challenge of the machine learning scientist or data scientist to kind of deal with that problem to start off with. However, are there any kind of movement right now? Maybe there isn't, or even thought processes right now where that end-to-end process or end-to-end life cycle of that data from collection, where there needs to be certain kind of sanitation, let's say, sanitizing of that data to make sure that it's right at the point of collection to, okay, then you clean it, you use it in your models, you create your features, whatever. So is there a process already, like almost like a underlying governance process, or is it something that's the data available, so we're going to do this in that way because we have no other choice?
Yeah, so practically it's the second, I would say.
Right.
I mean, whoever wants to, whatever we want to wish, right? I also wish that the best happens. But I think what's happening is the second. But having said that, there are a couple of good directions that people do research on. So, for example, they think a lot about the implicit biases of the algorithms that are being used. So they want to ensure whatever they use as algorithms, are not biasing additionally. And this is very important, I think. And you don't want to have biased estimates, and then that you would really end up in, even if your data is perfect, just because of your algorithm, you would end up in situations where you don't want. But people are working on trying to guarantee that this doesn't happen, and there is good research on that. Another hope is that we are gathering large amounts of data these days. I'm almost consumed the entire internet. And in that data, even the small portion, like even these biases, like underrepresented groups, compared to the data we used before, are represented actually somehow.
Right. Because the size is big, right? Effectively,
the size is so big,
yeah.
And that even that group, you could actually learn about that group. So that means if the algorithms are a bit smart enough, right, then they are, if they know how to deal with imbalanced data, then there is a chance that they are going to, start leveraging information from these samples that, kind of appear to be out of distribution, but still in the data distribution, right? So I would say, like, it is very hard to control, unfortunately, this data collection process. And I'm like, there could be different fields where it's easier. There could be different fields where it's much, much harder. And I don't know about, some of these fields anyway. And I'm not an expert in, fair and diverse machine learning models also. So I should limit my comments on this. But again, people are keeping this in mind. But people are also at the same time trying to utilize all the data that they have at their disposal.
Is it a problem that you see also, that because you are trying to do one thing right now, let's say, trying to get that data, make it ethical, make sure that, do you see collaboration as a challenge as well when it comes to developing research, not research in general maybe, but also in your specific area as well? Because obviously data, you can't, it's going to be an effort, right? So once you collect it, maybe you have that data, maybe it can go to a centralized point or whatever it is, but it's you spend time and effort in. Is there a lot of collaboration in the academia, let's say, I don't know, Imperial College, within groups itself or outside Imperial? Like how is that working right now?
There are collaborative efforts to data collection, and I really value that. And within Imperial College also, for example, we have very good healthcare departments and, kind of neuroscience departments. And sometimes they send us really amazing data. I mean, not big data, but data that is very, very valuable.
Useful, yeah.
Right? It's very useful. Exactly. So they do the data collection, and then we kind of do the machine learning that happens. There are cases where I also got involved in the data collection itself. For example, we collected recently a sign language data set. That's a very important problem, right? And it's actually, it turns out that it becomes very hard to publish these things because of all the concerns around. Right? For example, some people ignorantly think that such problems are a bit niche problems that the general community is not interested in. But that's totally a blind comment. That's not true at all, because, like, for example, sign language dataset is not for the deaf people. It's more for the people who want to communicate with them, right? Which means all of us. So there are some ignorance always towards this type of topics. But on the other hand, people kind of think that if we make a mistake, if there is some kind of fairness or diversity issue in the data, right? How can we actually deal with that? So we have to be very cautious. So all that type of stuff are also there. So what we did, for example, we try to make it kind of gender neutral. Right? So you try to come up with gender neutral models and stuff like that. Yeah, but this is, for example, this was a collaboration with Tencent. And most of the effort was on their end. And I really value this. That is, otherwise, it's hard to do, because at this age where data is a big asset, I mean, of course, collecting it.
So do you, based on the access and the processing the data and the data sets that you have, is that what then determines for you and your team, what are we going to do with this data? Or do you have in mind, this is a problem we want to solve, and we're going to use this data to try and solve it? What is the flow of thinking of, we have the raw data, to we now want to create a practical solution?
Well, maybe the second approach would be more fruitful these days, practical, but I like to think about the nature of the problems that we have, independently of the data as well. I mean, data is definitely helpful in order to kind of learn, what are the key elements in this data that would lead to this particular solution of the problem and so on. But the nature of the problem to me matters, right? Like, for example, in one area of research, I'm trying to build four-dimensional motion priors, which means if we can build a prior knowledge about how humans or hands or animals or whatever moves, then we could actually maybe use these priors in downstream applications in order to make inference better. So now, of course, this is like you can think of it as a Bayesian inference problem where you have a likelihood and a prior, right? So how do you learn these priors? Well, I mean, this is thinking about the nature of the problem, right? Now you can, of course, learn it in a data-driven manner, and which we should. But then that means that we need to be able to think about what a human motion is, and then how do you represent it, and how do you use the data available in order to build this kind of a distribution on the motion itself. So this type of stuff we think about. And I think this is an example of thinking about the nature of the problem. We often think about why neural networks learn. So, not just they perform good, but can you actually say something about the generalization of a neural network without really seeing the test data? Right? So this is, again, like thinking about the learning problem.
Yeah.
Can I ask, sorry to interrupt you, Alex, just to quickly,
Oh.
so you talked about you think about the problem, or depending on the, like, let's say ideal world, let's say you think about the problem, and then you have to publish as well, and of course you have to, you have to do a literature review or the normal, the research stuff. Especially in your field, I think now there are, I don't know, per day there are like hundreds and thousands of papers that are just coming out, right? Like it's just not possible almost to keep up with who's doing what's going on. Like it's turned into like especially in the past couple of years, it's turned into a maybe a kind of a huge thing. And I'm using huge thing in a kind of bit of a sarcastic way as well, because it's also a messy situation, I think, in some ways, right? I think it's a fair statement to make. How do you generally try and keep up? Because what I've been speaking to, I have some friends who are professors in different universities in this very similar fields. What they were saying was that there's this tendency for people to kind of publish anything, random stuff, and it's another paper, another paper, another paper. But actually, if you really look at it, it hasn't advanced anything. So there's huge amount of noise now, effectively. And what he was saying, and some other people were saying the same thing, is that now you don't really look for the papers. What you do is that that certain people around the world, let's say Stanford, Imperial College, which has, name, and there are people, let's say yourself, that these people are, when they publish something, they've gone through, like what you said earlier, there is some kind of sense of having integrity to say, I'm putting this out because I really feel that this is important. How do you, from your side, when you want to look at it, do you follow that approach, or do you have another way to deal with this noise effectively? Let's call it that noise, or whatever we want to call it.
I mean, that is, of course, that's a very fair point that they make. It's just, of course, it creates a little bit of bias towards famous groups.
Yeah, exactly.
And we don't want that. But anyhow, it's a good approach, probably. What I also do is, I must admit, I cannot keep up. And I believe if someone says that, oh, I keep up, it's a bit of a stretch, probably. Yeah. But what I do is I learn fundamentals. And I recommend learning fundamentals, because certain trends, they pass, but fundamentals, they remain.
Yes.
Right. And, for example, there's this diffusion models now, they became very famous. And then to statisticians and to people who knew about MCMC, that was just, well, okay. That they were immediately into it, and they knew what it was about. Whereas some other people got super challenged because they were thinking that they need to leave GANs now and they need to move to the diffusion models, so they need to But for the others, it was just, oh, this was like yesterday I did run an MCMC, so let me run it this way, kind of a thing.
Right.
So fundamentals are important. And then, of course, we have internal biases. Like there are topics I like more. There are approaches that I like more. And I am very, I have an internal tendency to follow that kind of research, and I understand them easily, right? So it really doesn't take very much time to follow these. And then there is the reading part, of course. There is I would say, an artificial selection, maybe even a natural selection in our community towards good papers. One work comes out and you wait a little bit, and there will be a lot of hype about this particular method, right, in the community. And so let's say people are going to recommend it, right, in Twitter, in conferences, in the papers they write, and so on. So you will eventually end up reading these things for sure. By the way, I also from time to time like to go back and read about something that, like, there was a good chunk of research made up until 2010, let's say from the 1990 and to 2010, right? And in 2010 or 2012, there was this rapid change to deep learning. So people immediately forgot about this entire era of research. So I also want to go back to these times and kind of from time to time read a couple of papers that were influential there, just to give me fresh ideas on topics.
That's a brilliant.
It's a mix. Yeah. So there's also Scholar Inbox, which I should say really does a good job in filtering, but it recommends you content again that you like, right? That is kind of relevant to your research, not like something out of domain and that's gonna inspire you. Yeah. So yeah, all these paths, I would say.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Yes, so I interrupt you before. Please, Alex, go ahead.
No, you can interrupt me whenever you want to. That is totally fine. I mean, again, my background is not as technical and data as you guys are. I do come more from the social sciences, but I'm very fascinating in the way that processes lead to sort of the findings that we're seeing in, like the big findings, right? Like I like to see how things work, where ideas come from, and that's anyways.
Indeed.
So kind of a bit broader, right? Because there's so many exciting things that you're working on. I think you must look at data and be like, okay, we can do this, so we can do that, go this direction. Data sets, AI, machine learning, LLMs are the hottest topic, as you know as well. Specifically with the work that you're doing, what are you most excited about moving forward? What is the thing that you're like, this is where I really want to go to
in the next few years? The next few years, right? Like,
yeah. So I mean, I think I have a very definite answer to this because I also got this fellowship exactly on this topic. Yeah. So I am trying to, with a bunch of colleagues from other universities all around the world, we are trying to kind of open up this research area called topological deep learning. And that takes methods from algebraic topology and combines them with machine learning in order to build better AI models. Or I should say machine learning models, in fact. And why is that? Because there are certain, again, data sets that we cannot really process. Like, I mean, we can process them, but we make quite simplistic assumptions on those. Like, typical example is a molecule. The molecule representations currently used in machine learning make a lot of simplistic assumptions about molecules. And we want to get rid of those, and we want to model these data in, staying true to the nature of data, basically, right? So we want to model all the complexities and intricacies in that data. So this is this area we call topological deep learning, and I think I will be pushing that a little further. By the way, this allows us to, in principle, model something called a higher order connection. So not just a pairwise link between two entities like in a graph, but also like relationships within relationships. For example, the easiest way to think about this is if you think of a social network, you just model it as a network, right? People are connected to other people. So it's a pairwise relationship between everyone. But in fact, in society, you form these groups, right? For example, you form families, you form friend circles, you form, all these things. And these are actually relationships among many, many, many people, maybe, right? And in fact, these are relationships between their relationships. So, like we are here, three of us, right? That is a relationship. And it doesn't mean that this relationship is manifested through the pairwise relationship between each of us, but it's rather us being here as three people manifests a relationship itself. So topological deep learning is good for modeling such kind of stuff that graphs, for example, cannot capture. So so we are also writing a book about this right now. So it's tdlbook.org. It's online, so it's free for everyone to look at and so on. So I think this will be a little bit of a future direction, I must say. And it has a lot of applications, from 3D vision to medical imaging to understanding molecules and autonomous driving. So many.
And the links will be...
What is the actual application? Because you create all that modeling, you understand it better. What does that look like in real life, right?
So the drug discovery is one good application, for example, trying to find more like novel molecules or predict attributes of viruses, whatever, bacteria and stuff. But also like modeling traffic, like networks like that, modeling 3D shapes, modeling CAD models, like computer-aided design models. Like you name it. So there are a lot of applications.
And then information about the work and the link and everything will be available on the show notes as well. So you can, of course, go and check it out and have a look through that. I think we're kind of coming towards the end of the podcast. So I want to kind of really focus on, effectively almost knowledge sharing kind of aspect. So you and, in the past, you mentioned at the very beginning, you've started in Turkey, been in many, many different places and United States. Now you back in the UK, and you had a huge successful journey right up to now and to the future as well. If you were to look back and if you were to give advice to your younger self and thereby to any PhDs and possibly postdocs, what advice, if you were to kind of say the first top three things that you want to say, what would that be?
Right. So first one, I guess, is mostly about, like, also this is when I choose PhD students, for example, is the first criteria that I look at, right? They call this motivation, but I think this is way more than motivation, what I would like to say. It's more about passion. So it is true that when we are babies, like when we are just born, we don't know anything about AI, so it's impossible to love AI at that stage, right? So to love something, you need to first of all get familiar with it a little bit, and you need to demonstrate yourself that you can actually do it. And people shouldn't be afraid from engaging in such journeys. But once they really find what they kind of love, there is really no need to kind of deviate from it. Like, money is a very, for example, very superficial, I think, reason, because it will always come at some point. You will always do something impactful to actually generate this. But what is important is the mental health that comes with doing what you love, right? So I would really suggest, like PhD, for example, is a very frustrating journey, right? You kind of sleepless nights and love money and all that problems that come with these. Why would you embark on such a journey, right? Just because you love what to do. Like, there is no plan B around this, right? So I think this would be my first suggestion. And then we are really in a world where everything moves fast, as we talked about, right? But I really believe that stopping for a second and then really kind of thinking a little bit, reading a little bit, and pausing and not publishing for a little bit of time is completely all right if you want to invest in self-development, if you want to learn a bit the fundamentals and so on. Right? I would definitely give, for example, all my students the time needed to kind of develop themselves, basically. And I think this is very much ignored because people want to just publish one after the other.
Absolutely.
But these publications suddenly become much more impactful if they stop for a little while, learn something truly, and then apply it. That you see much better manuscripts being written, much better science being produced. So I think this is valuable, and I would suggest everyone to kind of just read a textbook, right? When was the last time you read a textbook? Think about it, right?
Going back to the absolute basics, right? And then, fundamentals, not basics, fundamentals.
Yeah, exactly. And, kind of do such things. And also, definitely my life is not purely about research. So I try to do many other things aside. So for me, music is a big part of my life. I would certainly suggest people to kind of keep sanity also in that, in such way, right? I mean, this makes you just simply love yourself more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess these are the ones
Thank you.
that I would
That
like to
was
say.
very, very cool.
Really, really nice. Yeah.
And
Yeah, but thanks. I think
Thanks,
this is
Jay.
a very. So I
yes,
was
go
just
ahead.
saying, this is a very important question, and it's something important to think about it. Thanks for asking.
Absolutely. And, because I remember, I'm sure you do as well, of course, when you're a PhD student, your life is a bit different, especially depending on your supervisor, especially depending on where you are and all that kind of stuff. So, especially the last one, it really is an important thing to look out for, right?
Let me just add this. So when I started my PhD, again, I did like 2 startups before
Yes.
I joined my PhD, and so I was a very practical engineer at that point, and all I wanted to do was to make things work. And I did it jointly with Siemens and Technical University of Munich. So the first project I started was like building these 3D reconstruction systems for large energy turbines. And this became industrially very successful. And I was very proud of myself. Siemens was selling licenses of that. I got an industry award about this, and so on and so forth. And I started to write the academic papers about this beautiful work that I thought I was doing. I wrote about that. And then my first paper rejected. And I was shocked. Like I was very angry, actually. Like, I mean, this has a lot of impact. I did this and that. So I said, okay, maybe just refine it, a little bit with the reviewers' comments and then submit again. Rejected again. So this paper got 3 times rejected after being accepted. And through that, I understood that this is like this type of a simple engineering of things like bringing together pieces sometimes is not contributing to the knowledge of science. So the paper wasn't being rejected because it was less impactful or because it didn't work, but because it didn't say anything like fundamental or it didn't contribute to science. And when you actually start to learn about science and about fundamentals, then you will be like what made this paper go into some conference was I changed some of the models that I had to a probabilistic one, and I argued why a probabilistic one would be better. And that was the key. For example, it was such a simple change for me compared to the rest of the giant pipeline, but for the community that was actually interesting.
So the community values
Mm-hmm.
contribution to science rather than look at the work that I've done that creates an impact, which is, let's say, the here and the now. That's a very interesting mentality.
It is also changing. It is also changing.
Yeah.
I think the community is much more receptive to impactful works that rather than fundamental contributions. But still, I would say yes.
Sorry, if you like to, please tell us a little bit about your 2 startups and why did you kind of let's say go back into academia after doing startup?
I mean, so one of them was I founded one of them in Turkey, and then we became a finalist in this conference called TechCrunch. Maybe you will know about it.
Yeah,
So,
we know.
and then through that we got funding, and then we moved the office to the US to San Francisco. But I wanted to do my master's, so this was when I was an undergrad. So I moved on to my master's. So I left my job, but of course shares stayed, but I left my job and then did my master's. And then after that, I came back to Turkey. I founded another one. And 4 years later, this company also, so there was a joint project with some autonomous company. So it was more sucked in to this other company. So then I didn't have anything to do. I really didn't have anything to do because at that time there was no vision and AI company in Turkey that did research.
Right.
So then I said, what to do next, and I said, okay, PhD again.
Yeah.
It's some academy. So PhD was like a vacation for me, in fact, because doing startups is like a
It's
lot of
nice.
work, and
It's a lot of work.
it's a lot of work. Not just it's a lot of kind of distracting work. Like you do this, but you also do that, and this, but you also do this, right? So it's a mix of things, and PhD is a very focused work, so it gives you
Yeah.
really a time to chill, if you want.
So your
Yeah.
startup experience has actually made your PhD life and research life a lot easier, is
Much
what you're
easier.
saying.
Yes,
Very nice.
that is true. That is true.
And I would just this is probably the last two questions that we have. So
Mhm.
one last question I think is probably maybe helpful just to go back to the point about the PhD students, and
Mhm.
also the postdocs. Now, it's a famous problem. Of course, it's a problem for a lot of people. I would say is that when you finish your PhD, where you want to go? You want to go either back into
Mhm.
industry, or you want to continue being in academia. Is it so? What I have noticed, again, just from giving talks at different universities, or with just being in different universities, is that what a lot of the PhD students, as well as even postdocs as well, they are focused on very much about, as you said, fundamentals, but also about, let's say, the model, like my accuracy is 94%, let's use another model to do it for 95%, or whatever, right? Whereas in industry, you probably don't care all that much about that level. What they care about other things like explainability versus accuracy, or understanding why things happen a certain way, all this other stuff, right? So but I feel that it's maybe something that is, maybe it's right to say this or not, depending on university, it may be changing. But when the PhDs finish their PhDs, they don't really have any kind of, most of them don't have any idea about that level of practical application of of that science,
Mhm.
especially machine learning. Is that right to say? And if that's the case, is there any way that, is there like a movement to help a little bit, especially now when it comes to uh, you know people looking at this industry, especially booming industry? Is there any kind of movement now to kind of help with that, to say, hey, it's all good, 95, 96, use this method, was this other one perfect, but when you go to industry, this is what matters?
Yeah, I think so. This is what industry collaborations are for,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
They
Yeah,
tell you actually what the problem is, you
exactly.
know, and we are in a community of amazingly intelligent people. If you give them a data set and a metric,
Yeah,
they are going to optimize for that particular metric,
absolutely.
and they will do it perfectly because they are so smart that they are gonna crack this. Fine, we have seen this happening many times. But as you say, the problems and what we should think about can be different. And if we include these industry partners into our projects and start to think, still solve the same problem, right? But just look at it a different way.
Yes.
And look at the need and maybe what is important. And sometimes actually we also don't know what the problem is. Like we make up these problems and then solve them. But sometimes, when you go to industry, people are going to say, well, I mean, it's not a problem because this and this solved it, right? Like we have this dynamic camera. So we have one algorithm that can estimate the pose of the camera. Like there's a camera looking at the scene, like for example, my hand, and the camera is moving and my hand is moving. So, you kind of want to estimate both the pose of the camera and the movement of the hand. And we did some kind of a method for this. And some industry people actually came to us and said, well, in the egocentric settings where the camera is mounted in the head or something like that, looking outside, the camera pose estimation problem is solved almost perfectly thanks to the inertial systems and all the other fancy engineering that we do. So you could actually say that you accept this camera pose problem to be completely solved and solve the rest, right?
Yeah.
So we were actually, for example, solving something that was a bit synthetic, if you want. So I think these collaborations are very helpful in spotting that early on. And it's also good for PhD students because then they can go to industry and they can do an internship there, right? I think all of us, like all PhD students, should do an industry internship, and because they get to see the environment, they get to decide whether they go this path or that path. My entire PhD was with industry. I still follow an academic path, but I know the industry problem there, for example.
Yeah. And then also that lines up perfectly with this movement about impactful versus, this making that little dent in science, but maybe there's a huge impact on what you've done with using the existing stuff. Right now, especially like if you want to publish that, now there is more room for that, maybe compared to 20, 30 years ago,
Agreed.
whenever it was. And, that's also kind of lines up perfectly, right?
Agreed.
Thank you so much for that. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you too. No, that's yeah. Thank you.
And so the final question, Alex, do you want to ask the final question?
Yeah, it's a question that we like to ask most of our guests. It's you've had your research journey, you've gone through a lot, you're really looking towards the future. It seems like you're also very much about reflecting how you get to where you are today and where you're going. But looking back, is there somebody that that maybe you haven't thanked, but that you would really like to thank today, and why, of course?
Right.
Putting you on the spot.
Yes,
No,
I know. Now we're getting
that's
to the real
great.
stuff.
That's great. I might have thanked them. One name or jointly two names come to mind. So I entered this field first of all through a project that my first supervisor in the university advertised, and she supported me very much. So this is Aytül Erçil back in Turkey. So I always thank her. I guess I thanked her a couple of times. But what maybe a person I didn't thank was a master student of hers at the time. His name was Hakan, and Hakan was a genius basically. So he was an amazing engineer. Whatever he touched, it turned out to work. Whatever he did. I've never seen something like this. I still haven't seen something like that actually. Like he would be able to make anything work. And I learned a lot from him. We worked quite a while together. Now he is actually running a software company that can deliver goods and resources to Africa and to regions of the world which have limited access to resources in general. So I think these two people I should thank.
Thank
Great.
you. Thank you so much. That's so lovely.
No, that's lovely. Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks for asking.
I mean, we can go on forever, but we're gonna have to
Indeed.
wrap it up.
Indeed.
Thank you so much for your time, and we
Thank you,
look forward
Alex.
to following you on your journey.
Yes.
Thank
And
you.
it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you as well.
Indeed, for me too. And I will be following the rest of your podcast with even more excitement now.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.